A big part of my career has been looking at the therapeutic value of the 12 steps because the 12 steps really have harnessed some powerful psychological forces that creates an amazing change in our life. What is that change? Well, the truth is that the 12 steps are engineered to help us achieve emotional sobriety, to achieve true independence of spirit, to achieve autonomy, to learn how to take care of ourselves. These are things that we don't know. Emotional sobriety really helps us learn how to have a healthy relationship, how to have union with the preservation of our integrity, how to cooperate with integrity. Most of us get lost in our relationships. Most of us do a lot of things we don't want to do. We don't really know how to show up in a good way. Emotional sobriety is about learning to have healthy relationships.
Christopher Lash, who wrote an incredible book in the 1970s. The title of it was called The Culture of Narcissism. And it was just a compelling argument on how our culture just continues to produce narcissists. And not personality disorder level, I mean somebody that's an extreme example of narcissism, but every one of us, is just raised with what Don Miguel Ruiz calls his sense of personal importance. So essentially, we make everything about us. That's narcissistic in its nature. And this culture orients us to that. It also orients us to the idea that I am more the more I have. If I have a shiny new car, that means I'm somehow okay. If I've got these clothes, if I look this way, I mean, it's all of this idea that our validation or our sense of ourself, our self-esteem is an other-based self-esteem. It's externally based. It's based on environmental support. Well, if that's the case, and it's also in terms of our development, if we're delayed in our development, because it's very common for the child to make everything about them because the world is about them. They are the center of the universe. And so if those infantile aspects of the ego persist into adulthood, which they do, and they're encouraged to in our culture, then we grow up being very much the way that Christopher Lash says it, that we end up expecting too much from our environment and too little from ourselves. Let me say that again. That we expect too much from our environment and too little from ourselves. We expect that somehow our environment is going to provide us with what we need, with the necessary experiences and tools to be okay with ourselves, to have self-esteem. And we expect too little of ourselves, meaning we don't expect ourselves to make much of a contribution to that process. We just want it to happen. There's a certain passivity that exists for us. Well, this chapter is about breaking that big lie, the big lie that your happiness is dependent on what's going to happen to you. That somehow, if life conforms to your expectations, you will be okay. And if not, at the least, it's bad luck. At the worst, you're cursed by God for something terrible that you've done. But this dependency on our environment being a certain way for us to be okay puts so much pressure, so much emphasis on those things that happen to us versus the meaning we give to those things and how we cope with them. And that's what I want to give you an example of to illustrate that. That's a personal example in my life that I thought was very powerful as a way of talking about dealing with life on life's terms. By the way Herb and I like to define that is by having an honest and appropriate relationship to life, being aligned with life. Well, about 12 years ago now, my ex-wife, Jess, and I were pregnant with our first child. We didn't know she was going to be a little girl, but her name is Madeline. And so Madeline at that point was just a little fetus growing inside Jess's womb. And she was then a postdoctoral student at UCLA working in a B cell lab. And I had a practice in Hermosa Beach and one up in Santa Monica area. So because she was at UCLA, we decided that we would use the midwife group to help bring this unborn child into the world. She liked the idea of having a natural childbirth, and I had two children in my previous marriage to Jess, and both of them were home birthed. So I saw the value and the incredible experience of having a midwife involved rather than a medical doctor. And so I was very supportive of the idea. So we sign up for our midwife group at UCLA. They're wonderful. We're meeting with different midwives because it depends who's on call that weekend, who's going to be delivering. So we get a chance to meet all of them and develop a relationship. But part of the expectation at UCLA is that if you sign up for the midwife group, that you also have to participate in a genetic program that is designed to identify any congenital birth problems prior to birth so that the parents can be educated if they choose to continue to have the child, as well as community resources mobilized to help the parents deal with that issue, whatever it may be. So they do a ton of genetic testing and genetic counseling prior to the birth. And they took a bunch of blood from Jess. And here's the humbling thing. They said to me that, well, if she doesn't come back on positive, it doesn't matter what your genes are doing because her genes are dominant in terms of the development of the fetus. So we're waiting for the results and we're waiting. End of the first trimester, maybe beginning of the second, we go in for a well baby visit. Everything seems to be going well. Mom's healthy, the baby's healthy. They send us home. We're going to come back in a couple weeks. And then the midwife calls Jess back into the office. She had overlooked the fact that she had received the results of all of the genetic testing. And she looked at Jess and says, I have some bad news for you. She says, you tested positive for this gene, that if your husband has it, your child is going to have a 25% chance to have what's called spinal muscular atrophy. She says, what that means, if your child has the severest case of it, that she or he will only live until they're about 1.5 years old. They will always be on a ventilator because they cannot breathe by themselves. Best case scenario, if you have the least severe form of this problem, there has been no child that's lived beyond the age of 14. And once again, they are never free from being on a ventilator. Well, no newborn mother wants to hear that. You can imagine the anxiety, the pain, the concern that this generated in her. And when she called me after she heard the results, she was in tears and she was freaked out. I could barely make out, but I, of course, canceled my clients, came back, and now I had to give blood. Now, here's the interesting thing, is my testing was not going to come back for 6 months. So we were going to live for a 6-month period of time without knowing what the results would be and what the chance of our unborn child would have to have this very serious medical problem. So I give my blood. we're panicked, we're freaked out, we're scaring the shit out of ourselves. They say the smarter you all are, the more powerful your catastrophic thinking can be because you can think of all kinds of possibilities. And when you're dealing with a PhD cancer biologist, right, and a PhD psychologist, you can imagine the haunted house that we created that night in our life, right? It was pretty scary. So, as I've learned all the time long, if I don't know how to cope with something, turn to some of the people in my program. I called Herb, I called my sponsor, Tom, called my buddy, Roger. I just kept reaching out to see if I could get some support, and they were all wonderful and supportive, but it didn't take away the angst. It didn't take away. The reality was that there was an incredible threat looming in the future, an unbelievable threat. So, as often happens to me before, when I'm encountering a problem, I get so exhausted, I finally passed out at some point in the night, did not get a restful sleep at all. But I truly believe that God talks to us through our unconscious. And that there's been many moments when I've gone to sleep on a problem and I wake up and all of a sudden I have an answer to the dilemma I was facing the night before. And sometimes to an academic dilemma I was facing in terms of when I took my first class in analysis of variance. We were given a task and I couldn't for the life of me figure out how to make this thing work. I got close, but the next morning he said two things and it all came together for me. That happens oftentimes for me. So I tossed and I turned that night, as she did. It was impossible to get a restful sleep when I feel that much anxiety. And when I woke up, all of a sudden, a serenity, a peace came over me. And I had the following thought that created that peace. That what I did is I put the cart before the horse. I was making this experience I was having and the potential threat of it to decide who I was going to be in this situation. I was becoming victimized. I was letting myself become victimized by the circumstance I was in. When I realized that, I decided to claim the experience. Carpe diem, right? Seize the day. Well, what could I seize? Well, what I could seize in terms of the day was I could take the power back in terms of that I had given to this situation. And what I said to myself, if I only get my child a year and a half, I will love that child a year and a half in a lifetime. I will give them a lifetime of love in a year and a half. If God is so generous to give me that child for 14 years, I'll be blessed. And I'll be able to enjoy that child for 14 years and give that child as much love as I can give them in a lifetime for those 14 years. As soon as I said that, I took my emotional center of gravity and I moved it back into my person. The minute I did that, the anxiety was gone. The dread was gone. The catastrophizing was gone. I was settled that I could be okay no matter what happened. And then I had the second most powerful thought was, the child is never going to know the difference. The child's reality is going to be the reality they see through our eyes. So if that child's on an incubator, that's all they're going to know. They're not going to know what I know, that there's another possibility, because they don't have that other possibility. And so their life is going to be determined by how I'm reacting to what's going on with them, not by what's going on with them. We see it all the time. When a kid falls and scrapes their knee, what's the first thing they do? They look up at mom and dad and say, how should I feel about this? Is this okay? Am I going to be okay? Those two things set me free that night. It no longer mattered whether I had the gene or didn't. It turned out I didn't. And my child was born. Her name is Madeline. She's healthy now. Chances went from 1 out of 25% if I had the gene to 1 out of like 250,000 or something like that. The odds swung big time in our favor. But I was in that spot. No matter what happened, I had accepted it. I had accepted whatever outcome was to be. That's what living life on life terms looks like. We don't get there immediately. I struggled terribly that night. Even in fact, with all the stuff I've gone through the last year and a half, I've had a lot of pain and struggling. I'm getting to a better place. But it's not, I wasn't able to bypass that. I had to go through the pain. I had to go through the sorrow, had to experience the grief, the terror, all of those things that I'm describing to you that I felt in those situations, especially the one with Maddie. Well, that's an example of emotional sobriety. Now, when I shared it with Jess, just like that Bill promised, when we practice these principles in our daily affairs, that we and those about us begin to find emotional sobriety. She got the full benefit of it. She also had experienced a complete change in her anxiety. She no longer felt anxious. I jokingly say it's almost like we shared a bunch of volumes together. And we didn't. This was something that we were able to, the peace, the serenity we were able to generate by how we were dealing with the situation and not the situation being different. So I hope that example gives you some inspiration in terms of what's possible here. I don't believe these things are not just theories. These are great tools to live our life by. And I hope that experience I had illustrates that for you. So with that being said, let me invite Roger in and Tom, and I'll try to hang for another 10 or 15 minutes if I can, but I'm fading fast, guys.
Hey, I see you fading before my very eyes. It's you are doing yeoman's duty here. Tom, did you want to kick it off? Do you have something bubbling up you wanted to start with?
Nothing bubbling. There's no bubbles.
Okay, all right then.
Yeah.
No bubble.
No
Then
bubbles.
I'll do the. So Al, I appreciate that story a lot. I want to clarify something. You had said it was going to be. You said it was 6 months before you were going to get your results. I think in your book you had said it was 6 weeks. Yeah, I wanted to clarify that. Gee, I can't understand why you would have mixed it up. The state of mind you're in tonight. Yeah, it was 6 weeks before you were going to get the results back of your blood tests. The thing that stands out so much to me, Al, about that example, well, first, it's just the emotional impact. I'm a parent, and I can only imagine the levels of anxiety I would have gone through had I been in your and Jess's situation. But the point that stands out to me the most is this: even when we are unable to change the circumstances, the external realities, when we are totally powerless to change those external realities, that doesn't mean there isn't anything we can do to change our experience of a situation. And I wanted to make that, to really emphasize that point, because sometimes there are things we can do to change the external circumstances, and hopefully we will set about doing them. Things that we do have influence over and we can be proactive with, and we can take action that will change the situation. But many things in life, in terms of living life on life's terms, there are realities that we can't change. But the key point to me from that personal example you give is I can change my attitude, or at least I can look at changing my attitude. I can look at changing my response, as you already mentioned a couple of times, Alan. I can still look at changing how I perceive the situation, my place in the situation, the place of other people I care about in that situation. And I can try to open myself to see if there are any other possibilities for how I can react, for how I can change the meaning that I'm giving to this situation. Now, like you said, it doesn't mean it's still not going to be a very horrendous to very difficult to challenging situation for me to go through in my life. It doesn't mean with a shift in attitude. I remember a poem I saw on I think it was painted on a wall I drove by in West Los Angeles out here from the poet Angelou. And she said, if if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. And that was it. That was the whole saying from Maya Angelou, right? If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. Again, in the face of real life pain and real life challenges we're given, far easier said than done, right? Far easier said than done. And other people, if we're open to it, can be the most critical and important piece of that process, not to try to do it on our own by ourselves. But that's what stood out to me. Even when I'm in a situation that I'm not able to change the external circumstances of, I can still try to look at it in a different way. And like you said, Al, as soon as you did that, your experience changed. You were no longer nearly as frightened as you talk about in your chapter. You were no longer nearly as confused, as lost. You came back into yourself. So now it wasn't you out there in the chaotic and unpredictable nature of this situation. You came back into yourself in a really great way. So that's the aspect of it that I really wanted to speak to, and I really appreciate
Raj, the other part I wanted to share with you, I shared it with one of my good friends, the former medical director out of the Betty Ford Center, and he said, Alan, he said, you didn't realize, but you had an expectation that you should have a normal child.
Yeah.
And it's weird, I wouldn't have consciously said that to you, but of course that's what this was. As Bill Wilson said, when we have something that emotionally disturbs us, that it's a spiritual axiom, there's something off with us. Well, I wouldn't have told you that I had the expectation that I should have a normal child. And it's so interesting. He says, where did you get that expectation? How can you expect that? What makes you claim special status that you get to determine what's going to happen, in terms of life? I mean, life has its own course, right? It's going to take its own course, whatever that will be, depending on all the variables that are involved. But, it's back to this thing of this illusion of control. That somehow, if it's going to go the way I think it should go, I'm in control of that. And I think I want to feel like I'm in control because I don't have a lot of faith in my ability to deal with things when they're not. Right? I think that it gets tied to that because look, I never got much help dealing with disappointment in my life. Right? Never got much point, especially not much point in dealing with disillusionment. I mean, you know my history better than almost anybody, Roger, in terms of my father passing away and how that was dealt with in my family and all kinds of things that just left me with this big lie that I will be okay if things happen the way I think they're supposed to or they should.
Yeah.
Like my father shouldn't have died at 39. That was wrong. But what? Who gets to say it's wrong? I was disappointed that he died at 39. I wish he didn't, but It's not wrong. People die at 39. People die that have cancer at 39. And he did. He got exposed to radiation and it caused cancer in his body.
Yeah.
So I wanted to share that piece with it too. I think that was important.
Well, it is. And you do go into the expectations piece in detail in your book chapter and the role that played in all of this as well, Al. But thanks for bringing it in here as well, man. Tom.
Yo, it's bigger, you know, with all due respect to Roger and Maya Angelou, it's bigger than attitude. We're changing more than attitude. I don't know. Attitude just seems like a wimpy word for what we're really challenged to do with this kind of thing. We're talking about, and this is one of, you know, I always think that the short, you know, one of the short versions of the Serenity Prayer is the only thing I have any control about is me. You know, nothing. I can't control any other situation. I can't control another person. And I tend to use the language of I'm in charge of me rather than even control. Because if you think about the things you control, it's like I think about my physical self. Do I control that? Well, no, I influence that, but I'm ultimately not in control of that. We've all of us here have had health problems and stuff like that. We definitely have to work on accepting lack of control with that. But our mind, we are in charge of our mind, and I don't think that I got it. And this is what I think you're talking about, Alan. I don't think for the longest time until we were really working on this emotional sobriety stuff that I understood that the two ways that we actually have we have the power to change ourselves. One, I've always known about. Whatever happens to me, the old non-victim definition is whatever, whoever I am is determined by how I respond to what happens to me, not what happens to me. So it's that choice of behavior, that choice of response. But the bigger news for me is the power that we have on the front end of that, which is before the response, which is how we frame it, how we interpret whatever is happening. That we have the ability to consciously change our way. So I say it's more than attitude. I say it's belief. We're actually changing. We're choosing to change our belief systems, and when we can successfully change something, in terms of how we're seeing it, that's when we have influence on our emotions. That's when emotions you can't send the other emotions that you've already had back, but you're generating emotions that are more manageable. If we look at the first step, our lives are become unmanageable, and that's what you did, Alan. What you did is you came in there and you reinterpreted the whole thing. It's like, wait a minute. This is there's another way of seeing this. The choice is I can see first of all, I need to see this and make this more about my child. And the other is what are the, if I only had the options of how to handle this situation, and didn't feel like I had the option of having a child that didn't have this. And that's what you really did. You really took it. You took the other options away and put you in a forced choice situation. So how are you going to handle it? And you came up with some beautiful alternatives. And the main alternative was I'm just going to love the hell out of this baby for as long as it's with me. And that's what you could do. Now, one of the things I do want to say to everybody listening is, because I know that I can use what people are teaching to beat myself up, and I be careful. Don't necessarily use Alan's story as a a measure for how you're doing, because he's talking, this is a miraculous process that he's just described as far as I'm concerned. He went into this deeply, and he had this transformation of how he was experiencing it. It's like, my experience is most of the time when we're dealing with day-to-day stuff, or we're dealing with big stuff or little stuff, it's like we're going to have to change this stuff over a period of time. I'm going to need to change how I'm thinking about it. I'll need to experiment with how I'm thinking about it. I'll go back and I'll fuck it up again, and I'll be dealing with my toxic thoughts, and then I got to go. Okay, I got to remember. I got to go back to it. So it's just like the letting go process. It's like you don't let go one time. You just continually let go, and in this case, you just keep going back and working to get back to that place, because it's not always, and my experience, it's not often initially going to be that I'm going to feel the change and it's just going to stay. You know, I'm going once I get something, I'm probably going to lose that's part of the expectation that I have that I think is realistic. I'm probably going to lose my place, and I don't need to freak out about that. I need to understand that I need to get right back up, brush myself off, and whatever it was I was doing a moment ago, however I was thinking that was working for me, I need to get right back to it. You know, and I need to get you guys to remind me. You know, the reason we learn from how we screw things up, but we learn from what we're doing right. And if I share with you what I'm doing and how it's working for me, you can remind me when I stop doing it, when I forget to do it, when I forget how to do it.
Yeah.
Wow. That's it. That's all the bubbles I have.
Good bubbles. Good bubbles, Tom.
Well, I'm going to jump in here, gents.
Yeah, Tom, what do you want to add something to that tonight?
Yeah, and you guys got me, really, really thinking on a few topics. But before I forget, I just wanted to announce to the group, since we're at the end of this chapter, we said that we were going to have the next meeting, right? It would be next time we meet would be open discussion, because we haven't really had a chance to let people share. I think that's still going to be the case, Alan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's try it.
Yep. So we're gonna give that a shot. Next week it'll be all you guys, and gals, and whoever you want to identify. All our good friends and visitors who come to this meeting. We want to make sure you guys get a chance to share a lot of these topics that we've been talking about, kind of partway through the book. So a couple things which like rang bells in my head. One was I think it was Alan or Tom that said the illusion of control, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the topic of children, as you know, as your experience there, Alan. I have a good friend of mine. We met when we had about 10 years sober, so we've been friends for 26 years now, whatever it's been, and we had kids around the same time, and we're like, we thought we had really solid recovery, right? And like, so it was very easy when for us when our kids were small. There's an illusion of control. You put them here and they stay here. You put them there, they stay there. You feed them this and they don't have, and then over time they get, personalities, and they get to make choices. And they're like the sleeper cells of, emotional sobriety terrorism. It's like they're going to generate conditions for me to go, oh boy, I thought I had control over this little being, and I apparently either I've lost it or I never had it to begin. And it really, really kind of helped that understanding of, where my boundaries are, right, and that and what my level, controls are. I had the other piece was the expectation, and we're going through that. Oh yeah, expectation, and what we're going through it now with some stuff in our family. But related to the child, I don't know if anyone's seen the movie Arrival. It's a science fiction movie, but it's really a science fiction movie that delivers this message of acceptance and love in a very unique way. And it's been around for 8 years, so I'm going to spoil a little of it. It's basically, would you make the choices you would make if you know the outcome's going to come in someone losing somebody, right? It's like, you know they're going to have a short life. You know they're going to have a, you know you're going to lose them. It's the same, like we're going through that right now with our dog, right? And it was like it was a contract we made with this being at the beginning, right? And maybe we didn't think that 13 years ahead we're going to be suffering the way we are now with her passing, but it essentially is with these relationships we have, and more so with our pets, sometimes with our children. And would we make the same deal if we had that full awareness of what the end was going to be like? And the answer is yeah, because this is about living life and experiencing love, and this the relationships that we have with each other, that is the beauty, for my opinion, the beauty of living. I tried walling myself off from everything and protecting myself, and it wasn't very pretty. Wasn't very pretty at all. So sometimes the forced choice is the best choice, because it means I'm here and I'm experiencing it.
Yep.
Does someone need to believe in God to successfully overcome addiction? Well, the way I like to think about what the program does, it connects us to who we really are. And what does that mean? Well, there's this incredible force in you and I, this growth force. It's the force that moved us from crawling to walking. You wanted to take those first steps. And when you fell, and you fell a lot of times, you didn't let your failures stop you. You picked yourself up, you learned from it. And how many times did you fail before you walked? You failed as many times as you needed to. You see, that force, I call it a biological imperative, a psychological imperative, a spiritual imperative. It's moving you towards wholeness. It's moving you to be what you can be. Just like in the acorn is all the information it needs to become an oak tree. In you is all the information you need to become you. Become a you that can cope with life and to deal with whatever you need to deal with to be okay. And that's what I'll talk about in my new book, The 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety.